The Bible tells us a lot about the nature of God, who God is, what He's like, what His attributes are. And basically, God is love. Okay, we know that God is love, and we know the attributes of love from 1 Corinthians 13. And the word love is agape, and God is love. Agape, that means that agape is the God kind of love. So agape is described in 1 Corinthians 13. Love, agape, is patient and kind. It's not proud or boastful. It's keeps no record of wrongs. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes. That's love. We have the description of love given to us in 1 Corinthians 13. Those are the attributes of God, and God is those things. Um, we know in John 10:10, it says the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus came to give life and that more abundantly. We know that according to the Bible, Jesus Christ is the exact representation of God the Father. Okay, we know that Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. In other words, he has the same nature of God as God. He is begotten of God, and therefore has the same nature as his Father. And so he's exact representation of the Father's being. We know that everything God created was good. We know that in the Garden of Eden, everything, in the creation account in Genesis, we read how God created everything and it was good. Everything God created was good. All of it was good. And of course, we see how God gave Adam dominion over the earth, gave him authority over the earth. He said, "Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over all the earth." So Adam was given dominion. He was made the God of this world. God is the God of the universe. He's the God of all. He's the God. But he created the earth, and he did his recreation of the earth in Genesis 1. And he said to Adam, "Have dominion over it." He gave dominion of the earth to Adam. Adam became the God of this world because God gave the lordship of this world over to Adam. So Adam became the God of this world. All there was in Adam's life was good. He only had good. Everything God created was good. So all that was around Adam was good. Everything was good. There was no evil in the Garden of Eden except for Satan. Satan was the only source of evil, and that's because, of course, in the previous world on the earth, Satan had been thrown onto the earth and cast out of his position in heaven, and he had his body destroyed. So he took the body of a serpent. And we know that he was fallen at that time, and he was the source of evil. Satan was the only source of evil in the Garden of Eden. So there was no temptation for Adam except for Satan. Everything God made was on the principle of abundance. In other words, when you grew a crop, that crop itself would not only give you the crop, but it would give you seeds for growing more crops. The whole thing, everything God created on the earth was created on the principle of abundance. And the same thing with Adam and Eve. He made Adam and then he made Eve because it was not good for the man to be alone. And of course, we know that man needs a woman. God knew that it wasn't good for Adam to just be on his own, for man to not have a woman with him. And when Adam partook of the tree of good and evil, he gave lordship over to Satan. Satan became the God of this world. And that he committed high treason. Basically, Adam committed high treason. I have heard people say, well, why was there even a tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden if God knew this was going to happen and all this? Well, think about it. God had created everything good in the Garden of Eden and on the whole earth. Everything he created was good. Now, Adam only had the knowledge of good. He didn't have the knowledge of evil because he was created in a good atmosphere where there's only good around him, and there was nothing evil around him except Satan. And Satan was the one who brought the temptation to partake of the tree of good and evil, of knowledge of good and evil. Well, if Satan wasn't there would have been no temptation. We know God doesn't tempt anyone. The Bible tells us that God is not tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. God does not tempt anyone. God's not the cause of sin. God never tempts anyone to sin. God doesn't do that. He doesn't test people by, as far as trying to see if they'll sin or not. God doesn't do that. That's Satan. Satan is the accuser of the brethren, and Satan is the one who will try to get you to sin so he can accuse you. And that comes right back to Jesus Christ came to give us life, and that more abundantly. Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Satan is on one end of the spectrum, and Jesus Christ is on the other. Jesus came to give life, and that more abundantly, according to the law of abundance that God made, like when he created the plants and trees and all that. And Satan came to steal, kill, and destroy. That's what he's doing on this earth. He's stealing, killing, and destroying, in every manner you can think of. And in the Garden of Eden, there's a tree of knowledge of good and evil. That was never a temptation to Adam or Eve until Satan made it a temptation by saying, well, if you eat of this tree, you can learn, you'll have knowledge of good and evil just like God does. Well, think about that. God has the knowledge of good and evil. God knows all about good and he knows all about evil. He knows about both of them. He's just not tempted by evil. He cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So the knowledge of good and evil is actually a good thing, and it's actually part of God's nature. God knows. He has the knowledge of good and evil. So it was a good thing, and it was in the Garden of Eden, and it wasn't causing any harm until an evil source, Satan, came along and made it into a temptation and told Adam and Eve, basically that, hey, this fruit's good. It's good for you you'll become, knowledgeable like God in both good and evil. And so basically, man, when Adam partook of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he then had his eyes opened to both what was good and to what was evil. And of course, at that point, God had to say, God had to protect. Remember, love, God is love, and love always protects. So God had to protect Adam from eating from the tree of life. Why is that? If Adam had eaten from the tree of life, he never would have physically died. He would not have died. And think about that. Without death, we would not get our new bodies. When we get raptured or when we go to be with the Lord, we receive new bodies, according to 1 Corinthians, right? Or it tells us that, the new bodies we receive they're not carnal, they're not mortal, they're immortal, and they're imperishable. And our sinful bodies that we have as a result of Adam committing high treason will be done away with when that happens, when the rapture happens, or when you die and go be with the Lord. Then you've got victory over that old body, the body of sin is what Paul calls it. And the body of sin causes all kinds of temptation. Now, that's because Adam partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If he hadn't, then the body would not have been a problem. Adam had no temptation to eat of the tree of life because he already had life. There was no death. There was no death until Adam partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Once he did that, there was death. God told him that if you eat of this, you will surely die. He wasn't saying you die right when you eat it. He said you will die. It's going to happen. Death will happen. Death came into existence because Adam wanted the knowledge of good and evil. And Satan is the one who tempted him into it. And Adam and Eve only had the knowledge of good up until that point. They didn't have the knowledge of evil. So, but having the knowledge of good and evil is an attribute of God. So, you got to think about this coming from both directions. And so when this happened, Adam basically, being the God of this world, when he committed high treason, sold out to Satan, gave Satan the lordship over this world, obeyed Satan instead of God. Satan became the God of this world, and Satan laid down requirements that Adam never thought of as Lord of the earth. As the God of this world, Adam was good, and he was in a completely good atmosphere. Adam, to him, everything was good, and there was no reason to lay down any laws that required anything for doing something wrong, because no one was doing anything wrong. It was all good. Everything was good. But when Adam sinned and committed high treason and handed the authority of the earth over to Satan simultaneously, Satan now took his status as the God of this world, which he's called 4 times in the New Testament, 3 times by Jesus himself. He's called the Prince of this world, and Paul calls him the God of this world. But when he became the God of this world, he took advantage of it because Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So he created results for what someone did. In other words, curse of the law. The curse of the law is the result of not doing something, a result of disobeying, I should say. Now we know from the New Testament that's not God's nature. Jesus said, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you," and then what does he say? "I tell you, turn the other cheek." If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn them the other cheek. If someone asks you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. Now, the law, the Old Testament law, was based on justice, and people are receiving the recompense for what they did. And if someone slapped you in the cheek, you could slap them back. And if someone asked you to go 1 mile, then you could ask them to go 1 mile. That's how the law worked. It was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But Jesus said, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And then he contradicted it and said, "I say," in other words, this is what I think. This is what God the Father thinks. Jesus is the exact representation of the Father. And this is what Jesus says. This is what he's representing God here. And he's saying, "I say the curse of the law is wrong," is basically what Jesus said. When the woman caught in adultery was brought to Jesus, what did Jesus say? Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin be the first to cast a stone," because according to the law, they were supposed to stone her. According to the law that was in effect, the Old Testament law, when that woman was caught in adultery, she was supposed to be stoned to death. And the Jews said that, told him that, and said, "Hey," they reminded him of that fact and said, "What should we do?" They brought him to Jesus and said, "What should we do?" And Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." All the people, none of them could cast a stone because they knew they weren't perfect, so they all walked away. That left just Jesus. Jesus said, "Do they condemn you?" "No." "Well, I don't either." So Jesus wasn't condemning her for committing adultery, not saying he wasn't, saying she was right to commit adultery. In fact, he's told her, "Go and sin no more," because basically she's hurting herself by doing that. God is trying to protect us, and that's why the laws were given us, to protect us from the curse of the law, to protect us from the results of doing things that'll hurt us. That's why God gave the law. He gave it as a cheat sheet to keep us from having to bear the curse of the law. So basically, we have Adam committed high treason, handed lordship over to Satan. Satan created consequences for, he made it an earth law, that there was consequences of blood for blood, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. That's why God gave the animal sacrifices, to get the people around that, so they wouldn't have to shed their own blood. He gave them a way around it. And then when Jesus came, of course, he shed his blood once and for all, so that no one would ever have to shed any blood, animal blood or otherwise. No blood would have to be shed. And Satan's consequences were defeated. And Satan's ammunition was taken away because the law was canceled. Colossians 2:13-15 tells us the law was nailed to the cross with Christ. In other words, he did away with it. God did away with it, and he, forgave us all our sins, past, present, and future. And he took away the law, which is the source of accusation. The law was what brought the consequences. Law brings consequences, Paul told us. He said that, told us when you sin, there's consequences, basically. And so without the law, when you take away the law, where there is no law, there's no sin. That's basically what Paul told us. So yes, there's still sin. Sin now in the Bible is defined as being he who knows what is right to do and doesn't do it. For him, that's a sin. Okay, so if you know what's right to do and you don't do it, that is a sin. But in the New Testament, all the Old Testament sin, the Old Testament law, the curse of the law has been done away with. The curse of the law is no longer upon us. When we receive the salvation that God bought for us, when we receive salvation, when we accept Jesus Christ as Lord, we accept his lordship. He becomes the Lord of our life, and he's our king. And we're not accepting Satan's lordship anymore. Satan, being the god of this world, has default lordship over people. And of course, when you're born, you're innocent. So when babies are born, the Bible tells us, Romans tells us, Romans 7:9, that Paul says, once I was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life and I died. So Paul tells us first he was spiritually alive, then he spiritually died, and then he became spiritually alive again when he got saved. So we know that every child, up until the point where they know what's right to do and don't do it, every child is innocent before God. And so we know that everyone's actually born innocent, but they're also under the lordship of Satan and will fall into the curse of the law as soon as they know what's right to do and don't do it. So the whole idea of the law is that it's part of there's a curse attached to it. It's through the law that we know what is right, because the law is all good. I mean, it tells us to do like the Ten Commandments tells us good things about what to do that they're good things that'll help us to obtain the blessing of doing those things. When you don't kill people, you're not hurting other people. You're loving them. You're doing an attribute of God. When you don't steal from them, you're respecting people. You're not being rude. Love is not rude. It's not self-seeking. Love is kind. Love is patient. So when you're not stealing, you're respecting other people. Not committing adultery, you're respecting a covenant that people have made before God. You're respecting other people and their relationship. It's on and on. It's just basically the Ten Commandments are all good things because they all are the result of doing them is blessing. But the problem was that there was the curse of the law in the Old Testament that was attached to them. And if you read Deuteronomy 28:15 through 68, it tells you if you don't follow the laws I gave, God said these things will come upon you. And it basically gives all these curses, sickness and poverty and all kinds of just the crops fail, the cattle are everything falls under a curse, and all the ways of getting blessed get blocked. And of course, we know the entire Old Testament was written in the causative tense. The Old Testament Hebrew has a causative and a permissive tense. And every version of the Bible you've ever read, the King James, the NIV, the Revised Standard, they are all written in the causative tense. So it always looks like God is doing something, when actually the permissive tense says God allowed something. So we don't know ever when you read things in the Bible whether it means God caused it or God permitted it. You have to look at the New Testament and see what God's nature is to see what the truth is, or whether God created caused something to happen or permitted it to happen. If you look at the very beginning when Adam committed the sin, God didn't cause that sin to happen. He allowed it. God allowed it to happen, but he did not cause it to happen. He did not cause Adam to give over his lordship to Satan. Every sin that's happened since then has been because of the temptation of Satan, the temptation of sin, of knowing what's evil. And once you know what's evil, that becomes a temptation. And there was none of that originally in the Garden of Eden. So I wanted to give that backdrop as an understanding of who God is and what he is like. God's nature is, Jesus showed us God's nature. God's nature is not to give us what we deserve. He does not treat us as our sins deserve, the Bible tells us. That's not God's nature. His nature is love, and love is patient. In other words, it bears with people. Love covers a multitude of sins. God, in other words, he's trying to overlook and his idea is redemption. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. He redeemed us from it. That's what God wanted. In other words, the curse of the law wasn't God's idea. Otherwise, Christ wouldn't have redeemed us from it. Jesus told us every kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. If Satan drives out Satan, his kingdom is divided and cannot stand. That tells us two things. It tells us, first of all, that Satan's kingdom is not divided. Satan is always stealing, killing, and destroying. He doesn't divide from that. He doesn't go off in another direction. That's what he does. He steals, kills, and destroys. And then that tells us that God, of course, doesn't his kingdom is not divided either, or it couldn't stand. And his kingdom is based on love. Jesus came to give life and that more abundantly. And abundant life what is abundant life? God created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in a perfect example of an environment. And what did they do? Adam and Eve, they had sex, they had a child. The child was brought up seeing that how the mother and father love each other, and that if it was a son, he wanted to find a woman and love her the same way that his father loved his mother. If it was a little girl, the girl would grow up wanting to love a man like her mother loves her father. So that's the natural way of things. That's the way of abundance. That's what caused the reproduction of the earth. That's what caused the earth to be, the reproduction of man until we've become abundant and filled the earth and subdued it. Just as God said, He told us to fill the earth and subdue it. We've done that because of course, there's always flaws to that system. It's because man is not perfect. If a man beats his wife, obviously there's no example there for the children, and that causes a corruption, and causes a incorrect example and an incorrect thinking pattern in the child, because the child sees parents that don't love each other and don't care to carry on the pattern of abundance. Um, you know, Everyone is born either a man or a woman, and they're born into a situation where there's sin all around them. And so there's all kinds of variables that happen now because we're born into an atmosphere of all kinds of evil around us. But the principles of abundance always remain. They're always there. The principles of abundance are in the Bible. Jesus tells us what they are. Give, and it shall be given to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over, men will pour into your bosom. That's a principle of abundance. Give, and it shall be given to you. What did Satan say? Satan, when he was tempting Jesus, said, if you bow down to me, I will give you the kingdoms of the world and all their splendor. So in other words, Satan's side of it is temptation towards greed. In other words, he was trying to get Jesus to take over the kingdoms of this world by bowing to him and giving into greed instead of God, Jesus doing things the way of God the Father. And what was Jesus' answer? He said, no, it is written, serve the Lord and serve him only. So, Jesus responded with the truth and the way of love when Satan attacked with the way of greed, which, of course, greed causes jealousy. What does jealousy cause? Hatred. And what is, jealousy and hatred? That's part of Satan's kingdom. That's part of stealing, killing, destroying. People destroy because they're jealous. They destroy because they hate. Hatred and destruction and jealousy and all that stuff go hand in hand. And love is always in the category of abundance. Abundance and love go together. There's an abundance of good things in your life when you're loving people and you're showing the example of Jesus Christ. What are the principles of God, the principles of the kingdom? The principles are ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open to you. Give and it shall be given to you. These are all principles of the kingdom of God, and Satan comes against every one of those principles. Seek and you shall find. If you seek, Satan is going to put as much false information in front of you as he can to keep you from finding the truth. But if you're seeking, you'll find it because God promises if you seek, you will find. So seeking causes finding. Many people give up seeking because they find to a certain point and they stop looking. And they don't ever find the full truth, and they don't ever find the principle of love and the principle of abundance. Instead, they stop wherever it is that they got hung up. And usually it's Satan's thinking, the thinking of jealousy or hatred, or thinking that is caused by greed or any kind of satanic thought will block the finding of the truth. So, it's important to keep seeking and you'll find. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open to you. In other words, try. If you try something, you'll eventually succeed at it. Abraham Lincoln lost how many elections before he actually became president of the United States? It's because he kept knocking. Knock and the door shall be open to you. Seek and you shall find. Ask and it shall be given to you. That's a principle of prayer right there. Ask, and it shall be given to you. If you're asking for something that is according to the principle of love and according to the principles God put on this earth, ask and you shall receive. You shall receive. another principle of this world, give and it shall be given to you. That's the opposite of jealousy and being, if you're jealous of someone else's riches, and you basically are hating that person and wanting to put that person down and become rich yourself. That's not a principle of God. That's not love. Love is patient and kind. Love is not envious. Envy is the source of a lot of people becoming rich. They're envious of someone else's riches, and therefore they become rich, and they're never happy because they aren't operating in the principle of love. The principle of love says, give and it shall be given to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over, men will pour unto your bosom. So I just wanted to outline those principles. There's a lot more to this. We can go on all day, but I wanted to just give the overall picture, a kind of a synopsis of the whole picture of what has happened on this earth. I want to throw in one more thing real quick. God always protects because love always protects. God is love. Okay, it says 1 John 4:8, God is love. And then 1 Corinthians 13 tells us love always protects. Why did certain things happen in the Old Testament? Think about it when you read, next time you read the Old Testament, think about it. God always protects, always. And, just another thought to throw in there, and that in itself is another message altogether. And I'll do that at another time. But thanks for listening.